Welcome to episode 46 of the High Volume Hiring Podcast. I am your co-host, Stephen Rothberg of College Recruiter, where we believe that every student and recent graduate deserves a great career, and it should be easy and inexpensive for employers to hire them. I am joined with my not quite new, it's episode 2 for her, co-host, Jeanette Leeds of AMS. Jeanette, want to introduce yourself and then our awesome guest today?
Excellent. Hi, everyone. Great to be back for episode 46, number 2 for me. Jeanette Leeds. I am at AMS. I'm the managing director, executive vice president for our hourly and high volume solutions. So we combine the best of RPO people, technology, process, and combine it all together and help people hire better for high volume space.
And your voice is a little hoarser. And you're a little bit kind of like, wow, have I got another whole day ahead of you? Where are you calling in from?
So I sound a little like Barry White because I am at VecFest in Nashville. I may have been out listening to lots of live music over the past few days, maybe super late. And talking over live music. So this is the result. But for those who are watching it at RACFest, I will see you today. And for those that aren't, like this is fantastic. Just being in Nashville, weather's amazing, outside, different kind of conference, and just great content.
Talent acquisition meets party meets circus.
I mean, what more do you want? That's what this is about. Work fun is what I told the Uber driver at one point. Why are you here? Like, well, for work. And she sort of was like, oh, that sucks, or it's not good. Sorry, we're live. And I'm like, no, it's work fun. Like, this industry is amazing, right? Like, we are doing such great work. There's great people, and it's work fun. So that's why we have Barry White with you this morning instead of Jeanette Leeds. And we have Sam too on episode 46.
Yeah. And Sam, do you want to introduce yourself, tell people about your background and also Dalia?
Sure. Yeah. So Sam Fitzroy, co-founder and CEO at Dalia. And at Dalia, we basically do job remarketing to drive up the conversion rate of job seekers to qualified applicants and hires. And I'll emphasize the hires because I think we'll talk more about that today. Background, I've been in the space for quite a while, mostly with big job sites on the job seeker product side of things. And yeah, like most of my career has been around product partnerships with a big emphasis on products that are measurable, drive ROI, all performance.
Cool.
Well, I love it. Well, so here's, if we just get into it, performance-based. So this may seem like a silly question, but for those, like, people don't always know, what does performance-based mean? Like, what is performance? Just like, let's sort of make it simple.
Yeah. I think, what we see is there's, it depends on the way that you're positioning your product and even pricing your product. And when we say performance-based, what that means to us is the product is built around delivering certain key results, and we charge, our price model is tied to the results that we deliver. And that's different from some other ways that companies will position their product or price. They might price on just having the feature available to you or giving you a tool that you can use. And it's unrelated to any results that you'll definitively get from using it. And so I think, like, when we say performance-based, that's what we mean. It's our approach and also the way that we price and charge for the product.
Interesting. So what I'm kind of reading between the lines, Sam, is that varies customer to customer. So what one customer is performance for Dalia might be different from another. Is that right? And maybe you can give us some examples of like what that might look like for different clients.
Yeah, I mean, there's some nuance between our customers but generally, like, it's the same idea and high level trend is to drive up like efficiency in hiring and job advertising specifically. So we really focus in on driving job applications, but really it's only valuable for our customers if they're making hires from the applications that we're driving, activity that we're doing. And so that's why I was excited to have this conversation today and talk about, well, what does it mean? What's like valuable for one customer versus another? Usually it comes down to hires or placements if you're a staffing firm. But before that, there's lots of interesting conversion points that companies can measure and they're trying to optimize for, depending on what type of company you are. If you're a really high volume or if you're very niche, that might be different.
It's something we talk about all the time at AMS. It's the outcomes, right? Like ultimately delivering the hires. But to your point, what you're saying is like, it can't just be the hires. There's the quality. There's the metrics. What are the convergence things? So I know we talked about a few different things earlier when we were chatting. Talk to me about. I love data. Like I find if you can like figure out what some of those core data metrics, and that can inform strategy and like what you want to do. And so what do you think, like what kind of metrics are you using or would you recommend to track some of this performance that ultimately leads to outcomes? And I'm sounding like really Barry White right now. So
I was going to say, I think you're doing a great job.
Yeah.
There's like there's like a certain amount of data around job advertising that's available to anyone who's doing job advertising. And usually when the vendor is selling you something like a job board, they're going to sell you clicks. They're going to sell you very like top of funnel activity because that's generally what they drive. So it's this awareness, right? They're going to drive clicks and activity to you, either from the site to your career site, or they might sell you a conversion point, which is like, I took an action and I completed an application on the job site, like a quick apply, for example. So usually there's that data that's always available. It's the thing that they're selling because most job boards these days or job advertising sites are performance-based. Like you're paying for a certain amount of something like clicks or quick applications, right? So you always have that data. I think where we see the challenge is how does that translate to something that's meaningful for me in my hiring? So how does it translate to the next step in that process, a qualified application, somebody who isn't immediately rejected or somebody who moves forward in my hiring process? And that's usually a lot more valuable for our customers than just that top of funnel activity. So how is what's happening at the top of funnel translating to that next step? And then ultimately, am I hiring the people from this top of funnel activity that I paid for? And that's just like the basic funnel. It's like a marketing funnel, driving awareness and then conversion. And so we see it's difficult to track all the way through that process, depending on the systems that you have in place. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's really complicated. So that's really like the key differences. And I think like there's all kinds of touch points within that you can, once you start measuring it effectively, you can then optimize and get better performance from the various places that you're advertising.
I love that. It really helps to ensure that the vendor, whether it's Dalia or the job board or whatever, is their interests are better aligned with that of the employer. They're never going to be perfectly aligned, but if you perform well for the customer, then they're going to be happy to pay. Where if you just get a bunch of eyeballs and nobody applies, none of them are quality, that they don't end up hiring a bit, how does that help? It's just you'll cash their checks, but that's not what anybody wants long term. You mentioned a minute ago, Sam, about the direct apply. And before we went live, we were talking just for a minute about the quick apply, I should say, versus sending the candidate over to the employer's site, typically an ATS. And then it sounded like you feel like one of those is sometimes appropriate in certain circumstances and in other circumstances. So when is it a good idea to use a quick apply versus sending the candidate over to the ATS?
We see that it depends a lot on your setup, like what kind of recruiting team you've got in place or what team do you have in place to handle any sort of volume. And I think there's a difference we see in high volume hiring companies. A lot of companies have kind of re-engineered themselves to work well with quick applies. And really, if you in the marketing funnel, it would be like a lead that hasn't yet taken it's not very different than a full application into the ATS, the way that these customers are viewing it. And they've reorganized themselves to deal with a high volume of leads and then work them through their funnel. But it takes a certain amount of effort and organization within your recruiting team and sourcing team to deal with that. And that can work really well if you optimize for that path for getting quick applies. But we see a lot of companies will advertise and get those quick applies, but not be set up to deal with them in any meaningful way. And so they're getting lots of quick applies, but then they're not really converting through the hiring process. And so you're getting a lot of quick applies that are very low cost. But when you look at the effective like hiring, the cost per hire, it's not that great. And you've got a lot of bloat at the top of the funnel. And so in those cases, it might be better to drive people to your career site where they're more likely to apply if they're very interested, go through that process. And then your conversion from that point through to hire is usually much better. So I think it really depends on how you're set up to handle volume. And then, if you are sending traffic to your career site, there's all kinds of things that you can do to optimize that career site, to drive up conversion rates. And so there's a lot of opportunity there.
I think that's so interesting because that's the key. It's like you need to, if you don't have a good process set up that matches your tech and the people, then you have that issue, right? So like if you combine in both of those, that's where I feel like magic can happen. But what do you think about just building on that as well? Career site into like a quick apply, good process people. Like that's where if you can, are you seeing any organizations doing, it's sort of like combining the best of all of it into one?
We see companies do both, right?
Yeah.
Some companies will have a really good career site set up. Maybe they will have paid to put a platform on top of the ATS really to drive like leads and remarketing, and they'll be buying quick applies at the same time. And just the key is, are you measuring it? Like, is it effective? And have you figured out, do you have the data to show you how those two things are working together or against each other sometimes? Yeah. But yeah, we see companies do both. But usually when that happens, it's because they may have some decentralization in the recruiting. And so you'll have pods of recruiting teams running their own quick applies through their own budget. And then you'll have a centralized TA strategy doing something different back to the corporate site. And so sometimes it means there's like a disjointedness. But the key is like, if you can see the difference and measure it, then you can figure out like, well, should we isolate all of this into one strategy that works better for us?
I think we have time for one more quick question. So like rapid fire. Some companies that we at College Recruiter work with, and I would imagine you guys do as well, are very, very reliant on like one source for whether it's high volume or whether they're doing low volume. Do you have suggestions, Sam, for how those companies can reduce their dependency on that one, maybe two sources of candidates?
Yeah, we see that as well. And usually that dependency just builds up over time. And it's hard to find an alternative. So I think my suggestion is there are alternatives out there. I think the challenge is that a lot of high volume companies have alternatives and haven't been able to generate the volume at the low price of some of the big players. And that's why they feel that there's no other outlet, there's no other option, but there are. And what we're seeing is optimizing the traffic that you have on your career site can yield a huge increase in throughput. And so conversion rates on career sites are very low generally. Appcast puts out a benchmark report that shows the average click to complete application conversion rates are hovering around 5%.
Yep.
And it hasn't changed much. And so there's so much opportunity there. If you can take that up to 7%, that is a huge increase in applications and hires. And so that is the key. That's what we're seeing these high volume companies be able to do, is drive up that conversion of their career site and makes them less dependent on high volume sources that might not be converting through to hires.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. Jeanette, any closing words before you head back to the party? And
no, I just, I think this was incredibly interesting and helpful, and hopefully, viewers agree. But just talking through, again, there's different options out there, right? And and then you take what those options are, figure out what works best for your individual company, and set a good process around it. So it's fantastic. Thank you, Sam, for your time. We
thanks.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Jeanette.
Awesome. Take care, everyone.